So in today's video, I'm going to be going over important updates to BMNR. I'm also going to give you my thoughts on where they are, where they're going. Even more important, we're going to talk about the PIPE investors. So these are the VCs and institutional people who are able to get in extremely early at $4.50. We're going to look at all the SEC filings and be able to answer the question, when can these people unload and sell their shares? Because that's a critical piece of information. It will allow you to make informed decisions about the stock. Now, before we get started, my name is Colin. For those of you who are new around here, what I do is fundamental analysis, looking at stocks, crypto companies that I believe have long-term value. Now, remember, the stock and the crypto market is extremely volatile, so make sure you do your own due diligence and research before you get into anything. Finally, I'm not sponsored by anybody. These are all of my own raw thoughts. I don't have anything to sell you. So all I ask is that if you like this video, please consider liking, subscribing to the video, and that will help me a lot. And then finally, I use Twitter or X. So for those of you who are on there, please give me a follow. That way I can tweet out information faster than I can make a video. Now, those of you who've been following me will notice that I'm not in my usual basement studio right now. I'm traveling. So I apologize for the mic and, the equipment, but I'm going to continue to get you quality information so that you can make an informed decision. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So these are the topics we'll be covering today. First, an update on BMNR and its stock. Next, we're going to look at the PIPE investors, all of the SEC filings, and then give you a date so that you have that information in your mind going forward with it. Finally, I'll look at a dilution risk, a common misconception with all of these digital asset treasury companies, so that way you understand what you're getting yourself into. So today, the stock stopped at $50, gaining great momentum, a lot of volume, and it's actually in the top 10 traded stocks by volume within the market right now. So recently, Tom and Bitcoin gave us an update. If you remember back to July 27, they had only roughly 600,000 ETH at a price of $3,800, which gave them 2.3 billion. A small amount of Bitcoin, and then the cash was roughly 370 million. If you take that, divide it by the number of shares, it gave us a value of $23, a net asset value per share. So fast forward 30 days to August 24th, you could see their updated balance sheet. They now hold 1.7 million of ETH at a price of 4,800. That gave them 8.2 billion along with that Bitcoin that's held. And also right over here, $560 million of cash, all that ATM cash that's coming in. It gives the net asset value, their NAV, of 8.8 billion. You could see the numbers of shares increase, giving them a net asset value, a NAV per share of almost $40. Now, if you just take a look at the data, the raw data here, you might not gain an appreciation for what BitMine is doing. So I'm going to lay it all out here for you. So as you guys know, I love looking at these Excel sheets. I plot out the data so it gives me a more clear understanding of what's happening. If you look at the change in the ETH from, July 27th to August 24th, 30 days, it's gone from 600,000 to 1.7 million. That's an increase of 185%. Their NAV went from 2.7 billion to 8.8 billion. That's an increase of 228%. And then the NAV per share. So this is the ETH per share, NAV per share, the value per share that's increased. It's actually gone from $23 to about $40. That's a 75% increase. But what's even more incredible, if you look at their daily rate of this, right? So initially in my old model, I actually predicted that Tom would increase it by roughly 13,000 ETH per day accumulating. But when you look at the data for the past 30 days, it's almost 40,000 ETH that they're buying per day. That's a rate that's unimaginable. And if you look at the value in terms of their NAV and their treasury, you're talking about accumulating roughly $220 million per day. And if you look at their NAV per share, every day that's gone by, he's added 61 cents. Looking at this picture, it gives me a big picture that the management and Tom is actually executing his increasing asset per value by a rate that's unseen. And if you compare them to other digital asset treasury companies, BMNR, BitMine is actually second only to MSTR, so only second to Strategy. And in front of SBET, it's in front of MetaPlanet, some of my favorite digital asset treasury companies. So that's how rapid Tom has gone within a matter of 2 months. So if I just revisit the model earlier this month, you can actually see how rapid BitMine is expanding. So jumping right over here, we said back on August the 8th, when ETH was roughly around 4,000, they only had 833,000 units. You could see going from here to August 13th, they've accumulated 1.1 million. And then from August 13th to August 24th, they've actually gone to 1.7 million ETH. So that's a rapid accumulation over time. We talked about that 1 month accumulation rate of almost 40,000 ETH. Now their treasury holdings, you could see it went from 3.3 billion just August the 8th, okay, just about 16 days ago, to 5.4 billion on August the 13th within 5 days, and then now to 8.7 billion. I know that ETH is trading lower today, but this was the value when Tom reported it. So you could see the treasury has ballooned from August the 8th right over here, almost 164% increase in value. And we go to NAV per share exactly just within the month, within the 16 days, they've gone from $25 to $39. So I don't buy the argument of people saying that, as we continue to dilute the shares, and we're going to look at that share dilution, notice it gone from 130 million to almost 220 million. The NAV is increasing. That means that management is executing. They're increasing the asset value, the ETH per share value of your holdings, okay? Now, if you look back at the MNAV, we talked about the MNAV. It's a fluid number. It's the premium that the market assigns to the company. Remember that when we were using 1.72, so if you take a look at this, you get a $50, and back then we were doing 2. Now, of course, it's trading a little bit lower. The MNAV can contract, and it can increase rapidly, especially during the earlier days. Now, looking at our model, it would predict a share price of $51 here, $62 here, and $59 here. And of course, if you change this to today's price, ETH is trading roughly at 45, 4,600, you get a $57. As a market close, okay, when we look back at what the market closed on those dates right over here at August the 8th, it closed at $51. That meant that the MNAV at that time, and you could see when it fluctuates, it can actually go to 2.3, 2.5. It closed pretty close to what the model predicts. And right over here, it closed at actually 61 because when we're using an MNAV of 2. Now, in today's value, if we used an MNAV of 1.5, it should be closing at $57. But on Friday, when you look back at Friday before August 24th, it actually closed at $53. It's pretty close. Now, when we can track that MNAV, we could see that it almost perfectly aligns with the data. So remember, the MNAV is very fluid. Now, what makes this model special? Look at the rate of accumulation. Tom is accumulating rapidly. Bitmine's going really quick. If you look at Tom's prediction, he went on a mid-show and he talked about this. His near-term target is 5,500, and then his end-of-year estimate is roughly 10 to 12,000. Now, my end-of-year estimate for 2025, as I said in the last 4 videos, roughly 8,000. So if you just look at purely the increase in ETH going to 8,000 right over here, you can actually see it balloons the holdings, right? As ETH continues to increase in value, you get a share price of roughly $90. But if the NAV increases to where it was before, you're actually looking at over $100 already. And of course, if we just play around with these value, you could see. So if we go to 12,000 right over here, I'm just going to correct this. You can see that as the NAV increases, okay? So this number does include that cash value that Tom showed us earlier. You can see that the price of BMNR, the stock, can go up rapidly. So if we use the near term so that everybody gets a realistic price of what they could expect from BMNR at 5,500 using the exact same treasury values, you could see that we could end up at $76, $77. And that's easily achieved even on an MNAV of 1.7. Now remember that Bitmine just over a week ago already traded up at $72. So in my opinion, I think it's going to break that very easily. So keep these numbers in mind as you're going forward when you're thinking about the capital appreciation and the NAV per share appreciation of Bitmine. So far, Tom and Bitmine has hit all their targets. So with that out of the way, let's talk about a critical piece of information, the PIPE investors and the upcoming unlocking dates. So just to remind everybody, the PIPE investors are the early initial investors. Back in June, you could see this $250 million PIPE round that was led through a lot of major investors. So if we come down to here, you can see that Mosaics led this round, but also Pantera, some of the Galaxy Digital, DCG, a lot of the major investors who jumped in really early. We're going to explore this. We're going to take a look at dates, their filings, and when they can unlock. This is an earlier list that's compiled by Bruce AI back on July 28th. You could see all the big investors right over here, Mosaics, 5.8 million, 5.7% ownership in the company. FF Consumer Growth, that's actually Peter Thiel's company right over here. They registered for 5.1 million. And then you could see all the other investors right over here, Pantera, Stanley Druckenmiller, some of the big investors that you see on the list. And if we go down these early lists, we can actually see the names of all the stockholders, all the major holders. You can see Tom Lee right over here, Think Equity, which is the Ivy Banking that did the underwriting for BMNR. And I'm going to talk about them later, so we're going to come back to them. But notice that they got 1.3 million shares, okay? When are these shares unlocked? stock and when they could sell these shares. So we're going to answer that as well. You could see Stanley, Drunken Miller. So all of the previous and large shareholders that got into the PIPE round, we're going to talk about them. So the following forms that's filed with the SEC, the Form 8, the S3, the S1, it's actually really good general knowledge for you so that when you look at other companies like MicroStrategy, MetaPlanet, SBEP, you can see that what they're doing and how they unwind these PIPE investors. So let's go through them so we have a clear understanding of how this process works. So I know that we all come from different backgrounds, so it's good for us to review this so that we're all on the same page when we're talking about them. So the first thing is PIPE investments. So PIPE stands for private investments in public equities. So these are the large institutional and accredited investors. You know, you're talking about the VCs, the hedge funds. What they do is they go and they buy shares in a public company but in a private transaction. What that means is it's not available to everyday people like you and I, but these are the strategic investors. What it does is it allows BitMines or a company like MSTR go out there and they raise quick money. And you can see right over here for the company, and the shares are later registered with the SEC through the Form 3 so that they can be sold to the public. That's when people like us can trade those shares. And for BitMine, this happened in late June, early July. You can see they announced it on June 30th, and then it was closed on July 9. These are the strategic investors we talked about, and this was a huge round. It was 250 million. And I'm gonna break these all down. So before we get into the details of the PIPE investors, what they bought it for, when they could sell, it's important to know these three forms. So first, the S3 form. So that's simply a form that's filed with the SEC to register the securities, so stocks, bonds, that the company intends to sell with the public. This is a pre-approved version. So this is a shortcut version that allows the company to quickly raise money. And this is a fast-track version of the S1 form. So if we go to the S1 form, it's basically the long version of the S3. Again, allowing the company to state the securities that they want to sell to the public. So if you think about the S1 and the S3, when you hear about it, the S1 is basically the robust version, all the details, the full disclosure. Whereas the S3 form is more streamlined, abbreviated. That's the short form. And then finally, the 8K form that you hear about a lot, it simply is a disclosure to the shareholders. It's telling them a major event is happening to the company. And I want you guys to note that I'm getting all of these forms from the SEC website, but more important from BitMine's website. You could go over here onto BitMine under Investor Relations, and you could see and track all of the different forms that they filed with the SEC. And here's the amended S3 that BitMine filed with the SEC. You could see the date, July 28th, right over here. I'm going to be focusing on these, okay? Because these are actually the PIPE numbers. These are the PIPE investors. You can see right over here, 45 million shares of common stock, and then about 11 million shares of pre-funded warrants to be able to purchase for the PIPE investors. So I'm going to take all of this data because this is a lot to dig through right over here, and going through all the content, it's quite a lot, and I'm going to make your life easy. I'm going to put that onto my Excel so it makes my life easy so I can understand where all of these PIPE private investors are coming from. So when we lay out the details right over here, you could see the common shares, the PIPE investors, that 45 million share, it came at $4.50. So even today's price, it's already $50 the stock, so they're up 10x on their investment. Over here, the pre-funded warrants, that was 11 million shares, right? That can be converted from the warrants into a stock into 1-to-1 ratio. That's also $4.50. Strategic advisors, so these are people who are, strategic in their investments. They introduce you to new investors. They actually got 3.2 million at $5.40. The placement agent and the representative warrants, these guys actually belong to Think Equity. Remember the Think Equity I showed you earlier? If you add these two up, it's actually 1.3 million. So it's at $5.40 and that $10 when they exercise their shares, okay? So if you add them all up, it's 60 million. 92% of that were these folks right over here, the early PIPE investors. And then the advisors made up 5%, and then the middleman, the Think Equity LLC, which acts as the underwriter, the investment bank that does the underwriting for these shares, they actually got 1.3 million. So when are these people able to sell their shares? Because that's an important and critical date, because some of these people are in very, very heavy profits, and they're the early investors, that $250 million PIPE round. These are the individuals. So to answer that question, I actually dug through all of the SEC filings, those 8K forms, the S3 forms, and then I plotted it on a graph so that it's easier for us to look at. So if we come back right over here, that registration, after it happened, okay, on July 28th, they signed a SPA earlier, which restricted them for 90 days. So we go up and we look at the date where the PIPE truly unlocks right now, unless something changed, unless something that was filed with the SEC that I don't know about and I'm following up on it. it's actually October 7th. So for those 11 million pre-funded warrants and also the 45 million on October the 7th, they're actually legally able to sell those shares. So that's something for you to watch out for. And if you look at the strategic advisors and, the placement warrants, this was the Think Capital LLC right over here. Their date is actually up to December 1st and December 3rd. And then for the insiders, the 5% holders, so these are the major holders within the stock, and the insiders of the company, it's actually December 3rd. So if you look at this timeline, it's very critical when you're thinking about your own positioning and your strategy around BitMine share. So in my previous video, I went over some of these risks already. Number one is it's very volatile. This is crypto. It can go up and down 30%. So for those of you who are new and who are just getting into investments and especially crypto, this is something that is a leverage play. It's a leverage ETH, meaning it'll swing 2x in each direction. It's all tied to ETH value. So if your underlying thesis is ETH is going to go up, you should stick to it. But if you're worried about ETH going down, this is not something that you should touch. Finally, management can fail to execute. So we talked about this, but so far, if you look at what Tom's doing, and if you go back to that Excel sheet, so you can see that just in the month of August, in 16 days, Tom and BitMine has grown that value from 3.3 billion all the way to 8.8 billion. And notice that the NAV, the net asset value, has gone from $25 all the way to $40, okay? We almost had a 60% increase. So certainly management is executing on what they said. They're accumulating ETH at a rapid pace, increasing the asset per value share. And if you watch Tom talk about this all the time, he says, no, there's no risk to dilution. Why? Because we're increasing the asset per share, so the value in the company. If you notice, ETH per share has been increasing ever since they started on day one, and they've grown that through their NAV. So what Tom always says is, there's no trade that they're going to make when, the shares are trading at less than NAV. That makes no sense. And that's why he put out that $1 billion buyback program. So every time the shares fall below the net asset value or the ETH treasury holding, Tom's going to go out there and repurchase shares. And right now they have a healthy $560 million on their balance sheet ready to unload. And then just my own opinion is that by this Christmas, I still think ETH is going to hit 8,000, and you can plug that back into the model and see what it gives you. And then personally, in 2026, I think ETH will way outblow the $10,000 line, which Tom thinks it'll happen even earlier. So just to summarize, on July 9th, that was when the pipe closing day. And then July 28th, right over here, that's when the resale registration was effective, registered with the SEC. They would have been able to sell their shares, but they signed that SPA, that special agreement that barred them for 90 days. That brings us up to October 7th, which is the first date the investors can sell. And then the rest of the folks by December, keeping those dates in mind when you're considering to get in or not in terms of BMNR and how you position yourself. Okay, guys, that wraps it up for today. I apologize about the audio and visual as I'm traveling. I'll try to continue to make these videos until I get back into my basement studio. But I hope you gained some value out of today's video. So with that, I thank you for coming, and I will see you next time.